What is Pearl Harbor? Who bombed Pearl Harbor? Was the Pearl Harbor attack a success? Why did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? What happened in Pearl Harbor? How did the U.S. Navy react to this surprise attack? How many people died in Pearl Harbor? How did Japan get the U.S. involved in World War II? Who was fighting in World War II and why? How did the Americans feel? This is World War II in the Pacific. When war broke out in Europe in 1939, only 2 decades after the conclusion of the First World War, the people of the United States were adamant to stay out of the fight. They were satisfied sending military weapons to the British Allies, but beyond that, the war was none of their concern. On Sunday, December 7, 1941, shortly before 8 a.m., Japan launched a surprise attack on the United States of America by bombing the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The base was attacked by 350 Japanese aircrafts. Even though the attack only had lasted 75 minutes, Japanese destroyed or damaged nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 battleships and more than 340 airplanes. Over 24 Americans died in the attack, and many more were wounded. While the attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise, tensions between the U.S. and Japan had worsened over the decade, in particular with regards to Japan's expansion into China. The plan for attacking Pearl Harbor was to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet, which would give the Japanese time to carry out its plan to keep control of the Pacific without the U.S. interference. The shock of the attack without declaration of war enraged the American public and rallied the nation to get behind the war that many hoped to avoid. At the beginning of his speech to Congress requesting a declaration of war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered this now famous line.
Today, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
On December 7th, 1941, the world changed.
Very quickly you realized that this was a normal situation. The Japanese was attacking Pearl Harbor.
The air was filled with all kinds of smoke and debris. The noise was unbearable.
The planes were so thick, looked like they might fly into one another even.
The Japanese had everything planned. They were after the battleships and the aircraft, and that's what they got.
There was a total of 44 torpedoes dropped that morning. Inside of 20 minutes, the Oklahoma was over on her side.
We took the sight cap off the periscope. Bam! There went the Arizona.
The second attack was an hour and 15 minutes later, 167 aircraft. It was a sight I'll never forget. I watched the Arizona, the West Virginia, the Tennessee, the Nevada, California, Utah, all engulfed in smoke and flames and all sinking.
It was chaotic. Guys hollered for their lives.
Oil from the destroyer came on top of the water, caught fire, so it had flames all around us.
The fire from the Arizona was so intense. These guys that fell over, came up, got the film on their bodies, were like human torches.
The fireball went about 800 feet in the air and just enveloped us. I got burned over about 65% or 70% of my body.
We seen men jumping off the ship into boiling oil and water, trying to make it to the beach.
There was a body in the water
When I pulled the guy's arm, it came off. Well, of course, that scared the living daylights out of me.
I saw these bodies lying around. So the first run, I turned him over, and the back of his head was missing. I wasn't prepared for that.
I still, to this day, have memories of bodies we pulled out of the bay, but all of them was oil soaked, and it left a real bad memory.
Tears came to my eyes because of the destruction of the ships, and more important, the lives that were lost.
Milton Mapow joined the U.S. military in 1940. His motivation was to join the U.S. Navy. Growing up with the Atlantic Ocean in his backyard, the Navy was an easy choice.
I was born in a place called Rockaway Beach, New York. It's out along the Atlantic Ocean. I had the ocean on one side and the bay on the other. And I was always down there at the fishing pier and on the boats there. You know, I knew people that had boats. And always messing around, and I liked it. I liked being out on the water. My mother showed me pictures of me when I was a kid, and she had me dressed up in a sailor's uniform. So she says, that's what did it. And after being in Pearl Harbor about a week, they transferred me to USS Detroit. A week or so after I was transferred, the attack came. December 7th, I was aboard the Detroit. I was below decks, and my buddy and I were having a tray in our hand, we're just getting our breakfast, when we heard loud explosions. We ran topside, and as we come topside, I looked. My buddy said, what is it? And I looked, meatball, Japs.
Meatball is how the men referred to the emblem of the rising sun of the Japanese flag. It was then that Milt realized the American fleet at Pearl Harbor was under attack.
Then there's a plane coming in, and he was coming like this, lower and lower, and he was so low, I could see his face like I see you. And he was sitting there smiling. About that time, he dropped his torpedo.
Fortunately for the crew of the USS Detroit, the Japanese pilot has dropped his torpedo a fraction of a second too late. Milt watched as the shell sailed through the air, just missing the bow of the ship, and detonated on a small nearby island. Now that the reality of the situation has set in, the men did what they could to fight back.
And that's when we took off to try to get someplace to shoot back at these planes. Because all you can see, you look up in the sky and so all you can see was planes. And we couldn't shoot our big guns because they're too big on a light cruiser. If you shoot them, you kill everybody around. We got small arms, and that's the only thing we could do. Fire back with a rifle, and that was about it. We couldn't do too much. In the meantime, we were tied up opposite Battleship Row, and I seen the Arizona when it got hit with that bomb that blew up.
The bombing of the U.S. Arizona resulted in nearly half of the Americans' deaths that occurred in the Pearl Harbor attack. The ship exploded so violently and sank so quickly that over 900 men were forever entombed in the wreckage.
We did what we could until the second attack was over, and they got the ship underway.
The USS Detroit headed out to sea in an effort to run down the Japanese fleet, but it was too late. The attackers had vanished as quickly as they appeared. Justice would have to wait. For now, Milt and Detroit were called upon to escort hundreds of wounded men back to the States, where the news from Pearl Harbor had pulled the American public from a mood of apathy to a state of action.
That the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
The destroyers would come in first, and the landing craft be out, maneuvering out, waiting, and we come in, we bombard the beach, just in case you have a gun entrapments there and everything. But while we're firing, we got the battleships and cruisers beyond us firing right over us. Then the troops came in, and if they needed us, we'd come in and they'd direct us where to aim our fire.
As the Allies continued their campaign through the South Pacific, casualties on both sides continued to mount, and progress was slow and brutal. For the Japanese, surrender was not an option. Glory could only be found in victory or death. But as their situation became more desperate, they soon unleashed a strategy unlike anything Milt or the rest of the United States Navy had ever seen.
We went to the Philippines, and on the way to the Philippines, we got hit with a kamikaze that hit us back aft of a 5-inch 38 and a 40 millimeter, wiped out that whole crew but one man. You can't figure out how these men who give their life to kill themselves just to sink or kill people. They believed in the emperor, and that was it. We weren't brought up that way. They were. They all peeled off went different ways. And this one plane came in at us in the sun. And we were firing. I was firing on it. I was up over the bridge on a 40 millimeter director. And I had that gun going right at that plane, but it seemed it couldn't knock it down. And I watched it as he came in, and he hit us right behind number 1 stack. And next thing I knew, I was laying on the deck, and my foot was up here.
The explosion had thrown Milt across the deck and snapped his leg in half. He lay there in agony, helpless, as the ship began to sink.
One man come down at the fire control, and he says, reached down and injected my life belt, and he says, Mapo, that's all I can do for you. And over the side he went. And I looked up and I seen the stern of the ship up here, and where I was like this. I just looked up at the sky and I says, dear God, get me off this damn. And the next thing I knew, I was in the water. Got over to a life raft, and I just held on to the rope that was on the outside of it, and I held on to that for 2.5 hours until they picked us up.
Over the next 5 months, he would be transferred to and from hospitals at Okinawa, Saipan, and Hawaii, until finally arriving in California. There, he was promptly taken off the plane and put directly into an ambulance.
The following clip is the tragedies that happened in the beginning of Pearl Harbor attack, all reenacted.
Everyone else, battle stations! Get up! Come on!
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
With the 34th Division being sent to the latter, Jake found himself alongside thousands waiting for the next attack.
So we landed in Glasgow and took small ships back to North Ireland. I got transferred into G3 of 5th Corps. That means it's like heaven and hell compared. Infantry. You're dog soldiers. You have no future.
By the morning of June 6, 1944, the attack they were waiting for had finally arrived. But Jake had no way of knowing the incredible historical significance this invasion of France would carry, nor the horrors that waited on the beach.
G3 of 5th Corps was in charge of Omaha Beach. My job was making out the troop movements of the 2 divisions that we were in charge of. It's hard to relate this story, but when I landed on Omaha Beach, they let us off too early in the water, and we had water up to our chins, and we were supposed to be water up to the waist. Walking in the shore, I was the last one in line. The Germans had landing stuff mined underneath with about 1 million mines. And here we are being shot at, unbelievable, big, the biggest guns in the world shooting over us and back and forth. And I was more worried about stepping on a mine than I was the overhead firing. But we finally got in over the water is where I could lay down, and I laid down in there was a kind of a burrow there. At that time, I was having 2 MG-42 machine guns shooting at me from opposite sides, coming down and shooting right in front of that sandstone. That little piece of sandstone saved my life. At that time, everybody in the Army was smoking, and I had a waterproof pack of cigarettes along, so Rich got out a cigarette, and my matches were wet. So I noticed that there was a soldier behind me, so I said, have you got a match? And he didn't answer. So I turned and looked. And the helmet was there, but there was no head under the helmet. It was just like the soul of that soldier was telling me, get up and get going right now. And when I got up and ran, those machine guns stopped firing. They had to reload or change barrels or something. That's the way my life is. Luckiest man in the world. I got up and ran, and I couldn't see anybody to shoot at. And man, they were shooting, started shooting at me again, but I weighed 120 pounds at that time, and I don't think the Germans were capable of shooting a toothpick, you know. So I made it to shore.
On December 8, 1941, one day after the attack, the United States Congress declared war on Japan, officially entering World War II. At first, the Americans didn't want to join the war because it was across the world and they were already struggling with the Great Depression. The Americans were living on the streets, they barely had food, and some of them even lost all of their family. When the Americans found out about the war, they still stayed neutral. But when Japan attacked them, the isolation of the war ended on that same day, and they joined World War II. Ship after ship from the New World brings to Britain fresh thousands of American soldiers to springboard for the invasion. The Americans were so happy to finally be in Britain. A big amount of American nurses has also arrived in the same time. The Americans were greeted with kindness. They gave them donuts, cigarettes, coffee. When they arrived, everything had been fixed around from the British. A troop ship is in the train that meets them and is filled as soon as the train is gone. Another one pulls in time to the 10th of a second. When more American citizens get on, and they're going on their way to Britain. The sides of the war were the Allied powers, with France, Great Britain, the United States,
New York at war, and
Soviet Union, and later, China. The Axis powers was Germany,
Wings in honor past Hungary's strongman Admiral Horthy. The young men of
Italy,
as the Führer's grand tour draws to its end,
and Japan. On September 1st, 1939, the first attack was with Germany, who invaded Poland.
September the 1st, 1939, the Nazi army smashed into Poland. England and France had a treaty with Poland. Would they act now? At home, we listened in suspense.
Adolf Hitler's all-out attack on Poland makes the long-dreaded European war a certainty. Prime Minister Chamberlain of Great Britain gave the Nazi dictator a 0 hour for withdrawing his troops from Poland. That 0 hour ends now.
Following that, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3rd.
At this time, we transfer you to London for an important announcement by the British Prime Minister.
Up to the very last, it would have been quite possible to have arranged a peaceful and honorable settlement between Germany and Poland, but Hitler would not have it. But a situation in which no word given by Germany's ruler could be trusted, and no people or country could feel itself safe, had become intolerable. Now, may God bless you all, and may He defend the right, for it is evil things that we shall be fighting against, and against them I am certain that the right will prevail.
6 hours after Great Britain declared war on Nazi Germany, the Republic of France followed. All France is in a maelstrom of activity. The Maginot Line has already opened fire on the Germans. The sparring is ended. World War II has begun.
World War II lasted for 6 years, from 1939 to 1945. When an atomic bomb was dropped, Japan surrendered on September 2nd, 1945.
World War II in the Pacific, 4 years of bloody hell, came to an end here. September 2nd, 1945, a solemn ceremony on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay.
A mighty warship and a peace to celebrate.
The ship was packed with hundreds of sailors, Marines, reporters, cameramen, and top military brass with legendary names: Nimitz, Halsey, Wainwright, McCain, representatives of 9 Allied nations, and Supreme Allied Commander General Douglas MacArthur. Just before 9 that morning, the Japanese representatives approached the Missouri. They boarded in silence, took their places, and the brief ceremony began.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past.
MacArthur was about to become the interim ruler of Japan, and the Japanese people, defeated and afraid, did not know what to expect until this moment.
I announce it my firm purpose to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance.
Justice and tolerance. With those words, one Japanese delegate later said, "The deck of the Missouri was transformed into an altar of peace." The Japanese foreign minister signed the instrument of surrender, followed by the Army Chief of Staff. General MacArthur signed. Eyewitnesses saw his hands tremble. The Allied nations signed as well, bearing witness to the end of the worst war in human history. World War II finally was over.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed.
And that's when the Second World War came to an end.